So I'd now like to sort of more formally introduce our speaker. Father John Behr is Dean of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary in Crestwood, New York. He has been dean now for 5 years, but has spent 15 years now, is that correct, at St. Vladimir's. And he's getting to that point in many academics' careers where he finds that he now has colleagues whom he previously taught. Which is, I think, probably a great credit to many things, not the least of which is Father John's eminent teaching and scholastic abilities. He is professor of patristics at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary, a noted author, particularly of his works, The Way to Nicaea and the companion text, The Nicene Faith. He is also the author of the relatively recent publication, A Mystery of Christ, Life in Death. Also recently appeared in a very good video on the Nicene Creed that was put out by First Things. If you haven't seen the video, I would highly recommend it to you. He has also been a visiting lecturer in patristics at Fordham University and has also lectured at Harvard Divinity School. Father John holds an undergraduate degree from that great august institution, Thames Polytechnic, in London in the UK, which was, as he explains it, the only place in the UK where you could take do work on Emmanuel Levinas. And so Father's first love is a study of Levinas. He then moved on to the University of Oxford, where he did his MPhil and his DPhil in patristic studies with Metropolitan Kallistos of Dioclea. Father John comes from Orthodox family. His father is also a priest. His grandfather, Father John tells me, was the first Russian Orthodox priest to come to the UK after the Revolution, arriving there in 1926. On his mother's side, he is a Swiss-German background, and I believe you mentioned, Father, that your grandparents met at a Karl Barth seminar at Basel. So lots of interesting academic roots and religious roots in the life of the church there. Father John, as I said, is no stranger to many of us who work in the area of Eastern Christian studies. As one other august professor of Eastern Christian studies who will go nameless, although he has just taken a seat in the front row, has described Father John Behr as probably the leading Orthodox theologian now in North America. So without further ado, Father John, we invite you to address us.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here this evening. I know it's hot, it's late in the evening, or beginning to be late in the evening. I hope the atmosphere won't get too heavy and too heady. And thank you very much for your kind words of introduction, Andrew. It's really been my pleasure to be with you at Augustine College this day, to get to meet all your students and see the work that you do. It's really very, very impressive. Thank you for that. And thank you for not mentioning the cheese. Don't ask. In a recent book by Professor Andreas Kostenberger and Michael Kruger, they gave it a title, and the title really speaks volumes about our present climate. The title of the book, published 2010, is The Heresy of Orthodoxy. Subtitle, How Contemporary Culture's Fascination with Diversity Has Reshaped Our Understanding of Early Christianity. The Heresy of Orthodoxy. The title plays upon by reversing the kind of headlines that we've become all too accustomed to hear today. Headlines such as, the real truth about the historical Jesus. I can be sure that as we come to Easter, Pascha, we're going to get another magazine with another such title. Was the tomb really empty? Wasn't it really empty? Other titles that we hear constantly today would be things such as new documents discovered that shed light upon the real Jesus. Or, in the kind of field I work in, it would be why the so-called heretics were really right. The rise of the bishops and their patriarchal power. Or, another one I saw, the intolerance of orthodoxy and the marginalization of the so-called heretics. And then any number of variations upon that theme. Okay, that's what they're playing upon when they call their book the Heresy of Orthodoxy. Now, behind all such headlines, there is a common thrust. And that would be that the newly discovered texts, such as the so-called Gnostic material found at Nag Hammadi in the middle of the last century, or just a few years ago now, the recently discovered Gospel of Judas, that these newly discovered texts, or perhaps new insights gained through new critical analyses of familiar material, such as the dissection of the familiar canonical New Testament material by the Jesus Seminar to ascertain what Jesus really said and did. There's a common thrust, so either by this rediscovery of new material or by insights gained through new critical methods, we can get a basis which cuts through the biased interpretation or misrepresentation of those apostolic texts favored by an increasingly authoritative patriarchal episcopacy. And by cutting through that history, we can arrive at the original, the pure truth about Jesus, who he really was, what really happened. Was he really a Jewish rabbi with a particularly liberal or a particularly apocalyptic message? Perhaps the tomb wasn't really empty, perhaps it was simply misidentified. We can get to the real history of what happened in all of this. And then by doing so, the underlying presupposition is, by doing this, we can then correct Catholic or Orthodox Christianity. Where this Catholic or Orthodox Christianity is understood as an institutionalized, monolithic, uniformity intolerant of any diversity. Okay? That's the heresy of Orthodoxy today. Now, there are two particular presuppositions behind much of this work. And in fact, they stand somewhat uneasily together, but never mind. The first is a certain historicism, which presumes that to get to the real Jesus, the real historical Jesus, we have to go behind, as it were, behind the passion. We have to get to the time before the cross, to the real life, the real actions, the real teachings of Jesus himself, rather than the interpretations of him provided after the passion. So there's a kind of historicism evident at work in that. I'm going to come back to that. The second presupposition is that Orthodoxy or Catholicism, I'm just using those terms interchangeably for the first millennium, Orthodoxy, Catholicism claims a strict uniformity and is intolerant of diversity. Diversity, after all, would be seen as being a threat to patriarchal power or whatever else it might be. Whereas it's presumed, it's claimed, especially following Walter Bauer in the 20th century, that there was diversity from the very beginning. After all, the earliest Christian texts that we've got, the letters of Paul, already express disagreements about what Christianity is all about. They're written to correct errors. So, therefore, it's argued, any claims to an original apostolic deposit, which has been kept in its purity by the Catholic or the Orthodox Church, and from which heretics have departed, is claimed as simply false. There has been diversity from the beginning, and this gospel of diversity, as Kostenberger and Kruger put it, is so familiar to us today because it's so reassuringly modern or postmodern. Okay, so that's our contemporary situation. But really, things are not that simple. It's a fact that our only access to Christ is through interpretation. We don't have any uninterpreted, raw, historical data about anything. Everything is already interpreted and subject to further interpretation. So the question is always one of interpretation. What grounds it? What legitimates it? How are you doing it? And so from the beginning, Christianity has been a community of interpretation.